Welcome to the show where hosts Alain, Braux and Moxom talk with the people in the know about health and vitality from the worlds of low carb, paleo and natural health. This time we chat with author, scientist Sarah Ballantyne, aka the Paleo Mom, about how paleo helps virtually every health problem on this edition of the Low Carb and Paleo Show.
Good morning, Sarah, and welcome to the Low Carb Paleo Show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Good morning, Mark. I'm not sure we should have you on the show, actually, but I guess it's okay.
Okay, well, I'll sit quietly. How's that?
That works for me.
What did Mark do? He just started the show. And already
I forgot my wig today. Sorry, I've got an undressed head.
Before you came on, he was mean to me, so that's fine. But that's the way. That's how we roll. We have this kind of humor going on between this you would call it wry sense of humor.
Yep, wry humor.
And I'm not talking about the grain, Mark. I'm talking about the sense of humor.
Oh, I wouldn't have known that. Sorry.
No.
They're spelled differently.
They are.
Yeah, I mean that wouldn't be paleo anyway.
Gluten.
So Sarah, I did watch your presentation last year at the Paleo FX 2014. I was actually a volunteer, and actually I'm on the board of directors, and that brought obviously you to my attention. And when it was time to do a show, I was looking for different, what I call paleo queens, and your name came up. But instead of being a paleo queen, you're a paleo mom. So
right. Clearly I missed the boat on the handle right there, and I should have just called myself Paleo Queen from the beginning, right?
Yeah. You may have had to share it with other ladies, but we'll talk about it.
Not if I was first. Not if I had been
that's
first.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Good point.
Boat,
yeah.
Ship has sailed. Oh well.
Okay. Well, before we talk about your blog and all the good things you're doing, can you give us a background and how you came to the paleo lifestyle?
Yeah, so what brought me to paleo was really health struggles. So I think when people come to the paleo diet, there's sort of a few really common pathways, right? There's health struggles and looking for solutions for disease. There's desire to lose weight, which is sort of can be wrapped in with health struggles, and sometimes it kind of goes by itself. And then there's the sort of performance, sort of looking at optimal health and longevity, but not really coming from a place of disease or health conditions that need to be addressed. So for me, it was health conditions. I was morbidly obese by my late teens, and struggled with my weight all through my 20s and early 30s. And I lost weight successfully following a low carbohydrate diet, not a paleo diet, but just a sort of standard low carbohydrate diet, eating a lot of the junky marketed for low carb, like the low net carb type foods, and eating, it certainly wasn't a gluten-free diet. It was definitely not dairy-free. For me, I know now I'm very sensitive to dairy. And I was successfully losing weight, but as I lost weight, I was actually getting less and less healthy. So even though my blood sugar was regulating itself, and so there's a couple of things that were getting better. My blood pressure got better. I had pre-diabetes, and that went away. But everything else, and I suffered from over a dozen health conditions, everything else was progressively getting worse and worse and worse. And it was that frustration. I had 3 different skin conditions. I had eczema, psoriasis, and a second autoimmune condition called lichen planus. And it was that frustration with my skin, which was covered in these purple, flaky, scaly lesions that were painful. It was, dry and red. And it's such a obvious sign of poor health when you have skin conditions. It's like you're wearing your poor health like as a badge. You might as well have a big sign on your forehead. And I was frustrated because I felt like I had done everything right. I felt like I had lost weight. I had, at that point, lost 100 pounds, and I was in, a healthy weight range. And I kind of felt like, how can I have done all this work to get thinner and have had that success and have my health continuing to fall apart, and low energy and joint aches. I had irritable bowel syndrome. I had acid reflux. I had asthma. I had allergies. And it was that frustration that had me finally decide I needed to find a solution. And that sort of brought me to the internet, which is a pretty magical place sometimes. And I did a Google search. I had sort of heard, I had eczema, and I'd heard that could be related to food sensitivities, and that wheat and eggs were very common food sensitivities for eczema. And so I did a Google search that was, it was kind of like lichen planus, food sensitivities, like WTF, like what, why? And I happened on an article on thepaleodiet.com that was Lauren Cordain's website. And it was basically somebody had asked, like, I have lichen planus, will the paleo diet help me? And the article basically said, yes, it will. And so for me, that was the seed, right? And I remembered the paleo diet as that like crazy thing my friend Chad was doing, that he didn't eat anything. And so I started researching it more. And because I'm also a scientist, so I have a PhD in medical biophysics, and I had done 4 years of postdoctoral research in inflammation and critical care medicine, vascular biology, and cancer biology. And I had this huge, medical background. So I started reading the science that I could get my hands on about the paleo diet. And it was that science that made me think of it as not that crazy thing that's Chad's doing, but actually this really logical approach to food that actually made a lot of sense, and it really resonated with me. So after I spent about 3 months researching it and decided I was going to give it a try. And that was right after the Paleo Solution had come out. And so Rob Wolf's big tagline, I mean, it's still his big tagline, but, try it for 30 days and see how you look, feel, and perform. And I thought, okay, I'm gonna see Rob's 30 days, and I'm gonna raise him by 2 months. And I'm gonna try this thing for 3 months. And I'm just gonna jump in. I'm really good at jumping into major change like that and just going cold turkey. And so I jumped in, and within 2 weeks, I went off 6 prescription medications. So I became this I became a zealot. What can I say? I was going to say enthusiastic, but it was like one step higher than that. I became a zealot, and I, at that point, became really dedicated, not just to eating this way and the lifestyle stuff that goes with eating this way for the rest of my life, but I became really dedicated to understanding it, and understanding it at the cellular, molecular level, and then sharing that information and doing the sort of science writing and the translating. And my journey continued from there, because as much as my health dramatically improved with just a sort of a standard paleo diet, my skin conditions actually didn't. And so after 4 months on standard paleo, I discovered the autoimmune protocol, and that started my whole journey with not just further eliminations, but also this slightly different focus that I think is becoming more popular in the paleo movement as a whole now. But 3 years ago, it was a weird thing to be really focusing on more nutrient-dense foods and focusing on eating organ meat and seafood and vegetables until you think you can't fit another bite of vegetables into your mouth. And so 3 years ago, that was kind of a fringe idea within paleo, and it's much more sort of centralist now. But that was part of my journey, and part of finding health, and also propelling my research and how I go through scientific articles and what kind of things I'm looking for and how I'm writing about that and trying to explain the whys and from a contemporary science point of view rather than an evolutionary biology point of view for my readers. And that was the major inspiration for my books and basically everything that I'm doing moving forward.
Excellent.
Cool. Now, I know there are slightly different paleo churches out there. Which one do you belong to? Paleo, primal, or anything else?
I self-identify as paleo. However, I definitely fall into the camp of individual experimentation. So the way I look at foods is I look at food as food has some good stuff in it. So it has nutrients that will help your body, feed your cells, provide all the raw materials for all the chemical reactions in your body. And then there's bad stuff. So good stuff, bad stuff. So bad stuff would be things like gluten that's highly inflammatory, that's feeding gut dysbiosis, that's irritating the lining of the gut, the anti-nutrients that are stopping absorption. So I look at a food, I'm like, good stuff, bad stuff. So there's all these foods that are like standard paleo foods that are full of good stuff and don't have very much bad stuff. So meat, seafood, vegetables, fruit, eggs. I would put nuts and seeds as a little bit more gray. And then there's all of these foods that are like obvious no's. Like for me, that's anything that contains gluten. That's soy and peanuts. Like these are like the foods that are highly inflammatory and really don't work for anybody. Some people might tolerate them on occasion, but that's kind of different than it actually promoting health.
Yeah.
And then there's gray, right? So there's gray, and there's a huge spectrum of gray. So there's gray where there's foods that are like mostly bad, but maybe they have a little bit of good. And so maybe they make better cheat choices. And then there's foods that like might not work for some people, like tomatoes, right? Tomatoes can be quite inflammatory, especially if you have immune conditions. Yeah. But if you have a well-regulated immune system, they've got lots of great nutrition in them. So they're maybe on this side of the spectrum. And so for me, I think there's where you cut it off, right? What works for you and your body is something that you get to experiment with individually. So I sort of believe in this really clean version initially to kind of treat paleo as an elimination diet, and then experimentation. And, experimentation it starts with things like tomatoes and nuts and seeds and eggs and things that work for a lot of people but don't work for everybody. But then it can migrate into rice or properly prepared lentils, dairy products, these foods that I think work for fewer people, but there's certainly people out there that can really thrive with those foods in their diet. So for me, I really respect each person's individual bodies because there's so much that feeds into our tolerance for food. It's not just our genetics, but it's our stress levels and how much we're sleeping and how active we are and our health histories that really inform how our bodies are going to respond to a particular diet. So for me, I'm kind of in that, I guess it's sort of very central in terms of the spectrum of paleo, where I see all these gray foods as being potentially working for some people and worthy of self-experimentation, especially when you're talking about something like grass-fed dairy that does have some really strong redeeming nutritional features if it's well tolerated. So for me, that's, my overall philosophy is experimentation.
Right. As a Frenchman, I could not live without cheese, so I have to have a little bit of cheese once in a while as a treat. I don't make a regular thing. I also found that from my personal body, I need some fiber like lentils or something like that, because if I have too much protein, then I get what one would call blockage, and that doesn't work for me. So
doesn't work for anybody actually.
No, it doesn't. I think it's actually one of the biggest pitfalls for people when they first go paleo is they sort of overly focus on the proteins, because it's kind of like you finally have permission to eat red meat, right? You finally have permission to eat 6 eggs and a pound of bacon. And so we tend to kind of go like a little bit overboard, because I think if you follow sort of typical, standard American diet type guidelines, you're kind of told that you should limit those things. And so I think it's one of the things that happens when people first go paleo is they kind of go a little bit crazy to the exclusion of enough vegetables. And it's one of the things that in my research is one of the biggest themes is that high vegetable intake reduces risk of every disease. And we can see that as being part of the beneficial effects of fiber. And for fiber, it's not just feeding a good gut microbiome, the right kinds of bacteria living in our guts, but there's some hormonal effects from fiber that are really, really beneficial as well. And then it regulates digestion, it regulates blood sugars, right? Fiber's got all its benefits. And then vegetables also, right? They're really packed with vitamins and minerals and phytochemicals, which are mostly antioxidants that you just can't get from animal foods. Like I really believe in the necessity of both high quality animal foods and high quality plant foods.
Yeah, let's make sure to get some good quality root vegetable with soluble fibers, so to help with that elimination factor. I just had a question that just popped in my mind while you were mentioning hormonal change. Do you think that paleo diet would be beneficial for women that have menopause?
So, yes, I think that it's beneficial. I think it's beneficial for everyone purely from the standpoint of being a highly nutrient dense diet. And I think that it can support both extremes of hormone imbalances. So it can support hormone excesses because you're properly supporting the elimination of excess hormone by consuming a lot of insoluble fiber from leafy vegetables and non-starchy vegetables is really what helps support that elimination. Having a healthy gut means that you have a really controlled system of recycling, because these hormones are actually secreted into the gut and then partially reabsorbed. So when you have a high vegetable intake, you're allowed to eliminate the excess and you control that recycling a lot better. From the deficiency point of view, having a diet that supports steroid hormone production, and so part of that is it's related to regulating blood sugars. So regulating blood sugars also helps regulate the production of these steroid hormones. Having cholesterol available for the production of steroid hormones is really, really important. And that's one of the things that a diet that's not afraid of saturated fat is a diet that's actually providing this essential nutrient that's been so vilified. And meanwhile, we need it to make estrogen and progesterone and testosterone and vitamin D. It's an essential nutrient. It's an essential building block for us. And so, it's not going to it's not going to prevent women from going through menopause. But I think there's a lot of women who have found that adopting a paleo diet has sort of helped them with a lot of the symptoms, right? It's helped them with the hot flashes and it's helped them with sleep. And in large part, that's because it helps support these other systems just by virtue of the nutrient density. So it helps with, neurotransmitters, and you're producing enough serotonin and melatonin because you're eating enough high quality meat, so you're getting the tryptophan that you need. So I think that it can be really tremendously helpful, but it's not going to prevent menopause. That's still a natural phase of life for women, unfortunately.
Right. I didn't mean prevent, but help with symptoms.
Yeah,
yes,
definitely. And I think there's enough anecdotal stories out there to support that as well.
Right. And according to Kendall Kendrick, it would help with their sex life as well. Nutrient density, so one of the things that is really tremendously important for women supporting sort of sexual gratification and libido is testosterone. And testosterone can be suppressed by sort of nutrient poor diets. Again, it's another sex hormone based on cholesterol, but it's also related to stress, and that feeds back into blood sugar regulation. But it's also where the lifestyle starts to play an important factor. And I think that, when people are first introduced to the paleo diet, it's very much about food, right? It's very much about what's going to be on my plate, what do I clean out of my pantry, and it's overwhelming, right? It's a huge change to change your food. But when you're talking about whole health, food is only one piece of the puzzle, and it's also important to be reducing stress, increasing your stress management activities so you're more resilient to psychological stressors, getting enough sleep. We get on average an hour and a half to 2 hours less sleep every night than we did 50 years ago.
All right.
So when you actually, because I'm a geek, so I was, how much is that in a year? It's a month of consecutive sleep. A full 30 days sleeping 24 hours a day sleep per year that we are not getting, that science would tell us we definitely need. I think it's very short-sighted to think that that's not as big an input into our health as the nutrients on our plates and the and the inflammatory foods that we're choosing now not to eat. And I think that we know that sleep and stress management and activity, the reason why these things are so important, part of it is they support detoxification. The other huge part is they support hormone regulation. So you need to be focusing on lifestyle just as much as focusing on changing diet. And I think that for many people, the lifestyle changes that are the harder ones to make. Right? So it is way harder to make yourself go to bed at night.
So people out there, stop watching TV late and get off Facebook and get to sleep. Right.
Even my Facebook page, people need to get off it and go to bed. Yeah.
That's right. So during my research, looking into different, what I call them, paleo queens, I've noticed there's a slight difference of style between each of you. For example, some of them focus more on the exercise end, some of them are moms. I know you're a scientist and a mom. How is your paleo vision different than, for example, Paleo My God, Nom Paleo, Kenneth Kendricks, or Neil Stephenson?
So the way that I approach paleo is largely informed by my scientific background. And I have a scientific background that is fairly unique within the paleo movement and the people who are writing about the paleo diet, because I have a very extensive biology, physiology, pharmacology, biochemistry background. And I studied inflammation, I studied epithelial cell biology, I studied circulation, and I actually, nutrition wasn't part of what I studied. What I was studying was the very sort of typical medical research where you're looking to manipulate a system pharmacologically. But what I was studying was the body's natural ways of restraining inflammation and regulating inflammation and keeping inflammation in check, with the idea of developing a treatment that would boost the body's natural, right? And now I look at it and go, you don't need to develop a drug for that, because you can do that with food and you can do that with lifestyle. So my approach when I'm looking at various elements of diet and lifestyle and their importance and how those pieces sort of fit together, it comes from this understanding of the immune system, this understanding of gut health, because I studied gut epithelial cell biology. And it comes from, for me, I come at it from a whole body approach. So I look at all 12 of the body's systems and how they interact. And so for me, when I'm looking at whether or not something's a good choice, it's not just from the perspective of building more muscle. It's not just from the perspective of regulating insulin or regulating leptin. For me, I'm looking at how it affects every organ and all of the hormones, and how it affects, brain health, and how it affects, vascular health, and how it affects hormonal health. And so I think that, unfortunately, a fairly unique perspective. It's a perspective that I'm trying to educate more people on, so that people can really start to, as they're looking through the scientific literature, not get so myopic with one system. So I think there's a lot of there's a lot of things that we can do that's great for regulating insulin, or that's great for regulating leptin. But you can take those things to the extreme, to the detriment of cortisol, or your thyroid hormones, or your sex hormones. And I think that I'm trying to sort of increase awareness of this approach to health, where you're not just looking at one system or another. And it's hard because the body is so phenomenally complex, and it really requires a very detailed understanding of the whole human body to be able to look at it from that sort of taking that step back and looking at it. And even, many scientists, right, they are focused in on one tiny little system, and that's the one little thing that they study for their entire careers. And there's not, even within the scientific community, very many people who will take different fields and take the information from different fields and kind of put it together to form a big picture. And we, as a society, in order to move forward and be able to apply science to our daily lives, we need more people who are able to do that. So that's what I try to do. And I try to then also, rather than doing it from a scientific understanding, purely, academic perspective, I try and take it to the perspective of what's actionable. So what does this big picture then tell us about the choices that we can be making in our daily lives, and take it to a level where the general public can make use of that information. And so I think that, I have a large amount of overlap with the other paleo queens in terms of, opinions on, various foods and the importance of various lifestyle. But the way that I come at those opinions, I think, is quite different, because I'm coming at it from that scientific perspective.
Right. So did you, at what point did you start your blog and then eventually your Facebook page?
So I launched everything the same weekend. early November in 2011, and I had been paleo for 2 months, and I had already decided that my husband and my kids were going to do it, and my husband, he does not remember this, and he will not admit to this now, but he was not on board. He was sort of on board with the idea academically, but not practically. So he kind of said, like, I understand, I see the health improvements you're having. I would like to enjoy those health improvements. However, I don't want to give up toast, and I don't want to give up cereal, and I don't want to stop putting cream in my coffee. And he basically said, the only way I'm going to do paleo is if you can make it taste good. Like, that was his sort of ultimatum, like, make it taste good. Which, I mean, I love cooking. I've always loved cooking. It was a challenge that I was up for. And so it became part of, for me, blogging initially, because the first 6 months of blogging was not just about the science I was reading, but also about this process of transitioning my family to a paleo diet. As much as I jumped in with both feet, we decided not to clean out the pantry. We decided to leave all that stuff there. My husband, we just wouldn't buy it again. So when we were out of frosted mini wheats, we just didn't buy anymore, but we didn't actually throw them out. And so it really, it was kind of interesting for me to do this whole like jump in with both feet and then really kind of do it in bits and pieces with my family. But as we did it, especially with my kids, we saw huge health improvements. And so for me, blogging was, it was an outlet, because I was the zealot, and I was like, I'd go get my hair cut, and I would like tell the hairdresser about how the bagel shape for breakfast was going to kill her. And I would, right? I would like go get my teeth cleaned, and I'd be like trying to talk like in between mouth rinses about like this great new way of eating that I've found and how this, everybody should do it. And I needed to be able to express those opinions and the excitement and the science that I was reading to an audience that was already looking for that information. Because I don't believe in being evangelical. I believe in just being a resource and educating, but I don't believe in sort of going out and sort of beating people up about how they're eating. And so the blog was really, for me, it was that outlet. Like, I had never intended on it. I had never intended on writing books. I had never intended on it being my career. I'd always, at that point, planned on going back into science when my kids were in school. There's a program with the National Institutes of Health where women can take up to 8 years off of their academic careers for whatever reasons women take time off. And then they actually pay your salary to re-enter into academia. And I was always going to take advantage of this program. And then this blog and, all the social media that goes with it and the podcast and books, it grew so organically, and it became to me slowly over a couple of years, something that was more important. And, as I started my academic career actually in physics, and I then went into medical biophysics and then went into pure biology because I wanted to be socially relevant, and I wanted what I did with my life to matter. And my mom says, I used to say that when I was 6 years old, what do you want to be when you grow up? I want whatever I do to be important, is what I used to say as a 6-year-old. And it's one of the biggest realizations for me, and kind of a hard thing for me to wrap my head around initially, was that being a science translator, which is what I really consider myself to be now, is a more important job and has a bigger impact on society than what I could be doing as an academic researcher. And that it's this career, it's something that fewer people have the skills to do or that are interested in doing, and it makes a far bigger impact in sort of the average person's lives to sort of have people actually explaining science to them. So it was a journey that kind of, it literally, the blog ended my academic career by accident. But I think in a really positive way.
So culinary-wise, because I'm a chef, of course, how different is your cuisine from non-nom paleo, for example? Because I know she's also a mom.
I mean, I think Michelle Tam's cuisine is very Asian-inspired because of her cultural background. I'm Canadian, and Canadians are a very multicultural society. We're the true melting pot. And I grew up eating a lot of different ethnic cuisines. And so we had sort of traditional Canadian, which is, I would say, a little bit more vegetable heavy than traditional American, but very similar. But then we also, my family, what we would do if we were, going out, my grandparents' big treat for the whole family was to take us to Chinese restaurants or to take us out for sushi or to take us to an Indian restaurant. So we were exposed to these ethnic cuisines from a very young age. And I grew up in a family where being adventurous with food was like, it earned you this badge of honor. So we would, go out for Chinese food, and whatever kid was brave enough to put the fish eyeball in their mouth from the whole fish was like the winner. You didn't win anything. You just won, like, I don't know, you won recognition. You got to be the person who was brave enough to do that. And so I always loved cooking. I started cooking. My mom went back to university when I was 13. And so when I was 13, it became my responsibility to cook family meals several nights a week. So I started cooking for my whole family at 13 years old. And my very first summer job was in a fish and chips restaurant. My next job was working in the hospital of an intermediate care hospital. And so for me, cooking, I don't remember a time before cooking. Like, even before I was cooking by myself, I was always helping out.
Well, it makes sense. If you have French roots, you have to be involved in cooking, right?
It's right.
Food and cooking.
Well, and even I think it's also, I'm the typical Canadian mutt. So I have French roots, but I have Scottish roots and English roots. And I think I also have a mother who was a little bit too young to be a hippie, but still sort of influenced by that sort of mentality and making things from scratch. And we were poor, so that also forces you to make things from scratch. And so for me, I just always loved cooking. I always loved food. I think it's kind of a skill that you acquire on your way up to 300 pounds, right? Like it's kind of learning how to cook really good food it's not necessary, but it's helpful for becoming morbidly obese. So how I cook now is very similar to how I cooked before, but it's just using different ingredients and but that same type of way that I combine flavors, which is in many ways it's very multicultural, and in many ways it's very sort of typical North American home cooking. And so I think, I think that's sort of the big difference. But I've done some of Michelle's recipes and loved them. She's done some of my recipes and loved them. So clearly we have like a very compatible palate, even though our approaches are a little bit different.
So you also co-host your own paleo show, the Paleo View. Can you tell us about it?
So I co-host with Stacey Toth of Paleo Parents, and Stacey's husband, Matt, produces the show. And Stacey actually, the way that we got to know each other was I wrote a book review of her first book, which kind of got her attention. And she asked me if I would write a guest post for their blog. So I'd never written a guest post before. I had only been blogging for, 4 months or 5 months at this time. And so I was like, okay, well, how does that work? So we had a phone call that could have been a 10-minute, here's what a guest post is phone call, but it was a 2-hour long, like, oh my gosh, we're really compatible people and we really like each other. And then we kept finding excuses to talk to each other on the phone, and they kept being extremely long phone calls. And so podcasting was something that she had always wanted to do. And so she called me one day and said, hey, I have an idea for you. Don't say no right away, but how would you feel about co-hosting a podcast with me? And we'll produce it. All you need to do is be a dorky science person and show up. And I squealed. I was so excited about this idea of having this medium to connect with people, because it's very different people. It's one of the reasons why you see bloggers are on many different social media platforms. And it's because it's a way of connecting with different people, because different people like Twitter than like Facebook, and different people use Pinterest than use Instagram. And so if my job is educating people and connecting with people and inspiring them to make healthy changes in their lives, the best way I can do that is to connect with them in a way that's going to resonate with them. And so a podcast is a very different medium, and different people connect with it. Will listen to a podcast compared to read through a Facebook page. And so I was excited about it, and it's turned into a hugely successful show. It's syndicated, it's top rated on iTunes. And the way that we kind of do our show is we do sort of a chit chat, what's new in your life, what new dorky thing have I learned, like, what's coming up. And then we do a science segment where I get to really talk about whatever new, exciting science topic I'm inspired to talk about. And then we answer viewer questions. And it's a really neat combination of dorky, science, informative, and us just making fun of each other. Yeah. and sort of comic relief. And so it's been something it's been a tremendous learning experience too. Like, I can't even stand to listen to our earlier episodes. We were so awkward, and it was, apparently I didn't like organ meat in the earlier episodes. I don't even remember that. But yeah, so it's been a tremendous experience all around, which I'm sure you guys can
well, actually, your story is very close to our stories, because I don't know exactly how Mark found me, but he called me for an interview, and what started as a 20-minute interview turned out into 2 hours. And then a couple of weeks later, he called me back and said, "Are you interested in doing a podcast?" And unlike you, I didn't squeal, but I was.
Did a little bit.
I was highly dubious of my abilities to do a radio show, because I've never done this in my life before. But he convinced me, and here we are.
Had you met in person?
Never.
Prior to that? You've never met? So Stacey and I were podcasting for a year and a half before we ever met in person.
Yeah, eventually I'll make it back to France and I'll go visit him, but I'm not sure he'll open the door. So I don't know. I'll give it a try.
See how hard you knock. If you knock hard enough, it'll be less annoying to let you in, right?
If I bring a box of chocolate, maybe it'll open the door.
There you go. Bribery always works. Yeah.
Yes. So can you tell us about your books?
So my books, they were both published last year. The first one's called The Paleo Approach, and the second one's called The Paleo Approach Cookbook, and they are a pair designed to go together. And the first book is a guidebook. It's detailed science, written in a way that should be accessible to most people. But it was for me because what brought me to the paleo diet was struggles with autoimmune diseases. And when I was given the opportunity to write a book, that to me was what was needed in the paleo literature, was a resource for people with autoimmune disease, which is a huge, huge number of people. An estimate of 50 to 60 million Americans, about twice as many people have autoimmune disease as have cardiovascular disease. And there's so much information out there for people with cardiovascular disease or cancer, which is even half again. And then nothing for people with autoimmune disease. Like, there's no resources. And within the paleo community, there was, a half page in the paleo solution of what other foods to cut out, and no explanation as to why. So for me, I was writing that resource for people with autoimmune disease. It's really applicable to anybody with any chronic health condition, because it targets regulating the immune system, and because inflammation is part of the pathology of every chronic health condition. When you regulate the immune system, you control inflammation, and that provides the body with the opportunity to heal. So it was my resource for people with autoimmune disease, but at the same time, it was my opportunity to really get into the nitty-gritty science of how food interacts with the human body, and how some foods promote health and how some foods undermine your health. And most of that information is generally applicable. It's applicable to anybody, not just a chronic health condition, but just anybody interested in, an optimal diet for health and longevity. And so I was able to sort of put all of that in one, and then also, bring in those important lifestyle factors, because it's not just about what we eat, it's also about how we live. And so, really sort of integrating those lifestyle factors at a time when, not very many people in the paleo community were really talking about things like stress management and sleep. I think activity has sort of been wrapped into paleo since the early days, and pretty much since CrossFit really and paleo kind of got married, because I think they did. But, talking about things like circadian rhythms and how important it is to spend time outside and to sleep in a dark room, and things like getting enough sleep and, meditation or yoga or going for a walk out in nature, things that increase your resilience to stress. That wasn't a major part of the paleo conversation. And it's starting to become much more talked about now, that when we talk about the paleo lifestyle, it's not just because we want to eat this food for the rest of our lives. Like, that was what paleo lifestyle used to mean, right? We'd say, well, it's not a diet, it's a lifestyle. And it's a lifestyle because this is the way I'm going to eat for the rest of my life. But now when we say the paleo lifestyle, we mean I'm going to eat this way for the rest of my life, and I'm going to be active, and I'm going to get enough sleep, and I'm going to manage my stress, and I'm going to, change my priorities in order to have this life that is much more in tune with my biology and much more in tune with what my body actually needs. And a 2-hour commute in rush hour traffic is not what anybody actually needs, oddly enough. And so the paleo approach is sort of that, it's a very, very comprehensive resource for people with chronic illness, and it goes through the whole diet, lifestyle, the whys, the detailed, like, what does gluten actually do to your body, and who does it do it to? How much of that is for people with a genetic predisposition, and how much of that is general? And I've gone through all of the research in how we can possibly understand that. And then the cookbook is exactly that. It's like, okay, here's this diet, this taking the paleo diet to a therapeutic level to help manage chronic health conditions. Well, how do you actually do that in your home? And how do you actually, this is such a different way from how most people are eating. How do you still make food taste good? And so the cookbook was really sort of a general cookbook. It goes everywhere from, breakfasts and appetizers all the way to desserts. And, how do you actually implement this in your home? So it's sort of they're a pair, but there's not very much overlap in terms of information between them.
Good. We should trade books.
We should definitely trade books.
Yeah?
That sounds great.
I'll send you mine. You send me yours.
Done.
Some people say, and of course, I'm talking about the outside world, said that paleo is just a fad. What do you think about it? And where do you think it's going to be in a few years?
I don't think fad diets grow the way the paleo diet has grown. There's estimates that upwards of 6 million Americans are following a paleo diet right now, which is a larger percentage of us than people who identify as vegetarian. Like, that's a huge number of people. And I don't think people stick to fad diets for years, right? Like, to me, a fad diet is, I'm going to just eat cabbage soup for, a month, and I'm going to lose a pile of weight, and then I'm going to go back to my normal way of eating. Like, that is a fad diet. And I don't think fad diets are based in science the way the paleo diet is, right? The paleo diet is a diet that is based in nutritional sciences and physiology and understanding how food interacts with the human body. And it's a ridiculously nutrient-dense diet. I think the reason why people don't like it is because of the name. And I don't think we should change the name. I think the name is fine. But really, if it had been called the nutrient-dense anti-inflammatory diet from the beginning, I don't think people would be complaining about it so much. I think that where people can criticize it as being a fad diet is really where people misunderstand what the diet actually is. So whenever I see a critique about the paleo diet, I'll read it, I'll be like, well, yeah, that would be true if this is what a paleo diet actually was. If this is what we actually ate, then yeah, I could see how this criticism would be valid. But we don't just eat meat, and we're not just doing it as a historical reenactment. And yes, we recognize that the foods that we have access to are completely different than our Paleolithic ancestors. So I think that I think that it's something that as more science is being performed, there's a lot of clinical trials underway that are larger scale clinical trials than have been done before. There have been some studies that show that the paleo diet even beats out the Mediterranean diet when it comes to lowering cardiovascular disease risk, weight loss, diabetes. Like, there's science showing that it is the best option. And I think there's more science underway that's going to help confirm that. And I think as people can understand, right, the problem is the soundbite of we eat how cavemen ate, right? It's such an easy description. And unfortunately, it's inaccurate. And it opens up the paleo diet to even, these types of criticisms. But it's a nice, quick, we need a different, quick description.
There's also the misconception that the paleo is a diet and not a lifestyle, and that's what we need to change too, is for the rest of the 300 million people that are not on the paleo diet, how would you translate that into make them understand what the paleo lifestyle is?
Yeah, so for me, I would give the quick elevator speech of it's a whole foods diet that focuses on the most nutrient-dense foods and cuts out foods that we know are inflammatory. So it's a diet that focuses on a variety of quality meat, seafood, eggs, vegetables, fruits, nuts, and seed. I was always tell some people what we eat before we tell them what we don't eat, right? Like, I think that's really important, right? To frame it in this positive way rather than to think of how we eat as a list of things we avoid, because that's not good for anybody's mental health, but to think of it as what we do eat. And what we eat is complete and balanced nutrition. And we avoid refined processed foods, empty calories, right? That's what we're cutting out. We're cutting out empty calories and we're cutting out inflammatory foods. And then I would say, and it's a way of living that embraces a whole health perspective. So it focuses on stress management and adequate sleep and activity and treating your doing everything that you can with food and with lifestyle for optimal health. And so it's a way of living that gives us the best possible chances of living as long as we can and being as healthy as possible right up till the end. And I think that's what we all want, right? We all want to live a long time and enjoy our entire lives. And that's what this way of eating and living does. It supports that as much as we possibly can.
Well, it's not just living longer, it's also living longer but in better health. Because a lot of people seems to be confused between the two of them. It's like, well, we live longer now, but a lot of us are living longer but miserable, unhealthy lives.
We're spending our last 2 decades living in, hospitals or retirement homes with, extended care, and we're, miserable and in pain and on tons of medications. And that's not what any of us want.
We're taking all these medications, all these drugs and everything to, avoid the pains or mask the symptoms, but we're not doing anything to address the core issue, which is typically the way we feed ourselves.
And I think that, that's one thing that we see that's really different when you look at studies of hunter-gatherers or studies of these like isolated pockets of people who have really high percentages of centenarians, for example. When you look at those people, that's one of the other things, right? They're not just living longer, but they are walking 5 miles a day and then one day they just fall asleep and don't wake up, right? They are like perfectly healthy right up until the end. And I think that's I'm sure there's somebody out there who doesn't want it. I don't want to make a sweeping generalization, but I think that's what the vast majority of us want, right? We want to be healthy and enjoying our entire lives. Like, it's not just about living longer, but it's about being able to actually, do all the things that we want to do for as long as we possibly can. And I think that's one of the things that, right, a nutrient-dense, anti-inflammatory diet is going to support.
Going back to your husband, you know how difficult it was to change his mind. So if you were to address someone out there that is hooked on fast food and carbs and so on and so forth, how would you, because it sounds to me like your husband didn't have much of a choice, neither your children, right? I'm
the cook in
definitely.
my household, so I just started
Yeah,
making paleo foods, and they had to eat it. Yeah.
yeah. It's basically like my mom says, you eat what's on the plate, don't argue about it. And
Yeah.
but if you were talking to someone that's not in that situation, how would you approach, how would you convince them that the paleo diet is a healthier diet than all these carb-loaded, sugar-loaded, fast food? Don't get me started on GMOs and all this stuff, right?
I think there's two, but I have kind of two answers to that question. And the first one is, I think the best thing that I can do to help somebody take control of their health is give them education and explain to them what the foods they're eating is actually doing to their body and how changing their food can actually, make them feel better. But at the same time, if somebody is really addicted to fast food and they don't want to eat vegetables and they don't care about, seafood or organ meat, and they don't want to change, they don't want to give something up, then that's not my job to convince them to give it up, right? It's like a smoker, right? So smoking is highly addictive. Nobody smokes thinking it's going to improve their health. Nobody smokes thinking that it's going to make them live to be 120 and be like super marathoners, right? Like nobody thinks that smoking's good for them, and yet people still smoke because it's highly addictive. And when people want to quit smoking, that decision has to come from within themselves, because it's still, no matter how much education they have about how bad smoking is, it requires dedication to break that addiction. It requires willpower, and it requires sort of consistent effort, right? Like it requires a commitment to that. And the same thing is true with food addiction, right? We know that there's the same changes in the striatum of the brain in dopamine receptors as in food addiction. So in people with binge eating disorder or obesity, but there's the same type of changes in their brains as there is with drug or alcohol addiction or smoking addiction.
Sugar should be illegal drug. Sugar is highly addictive.
It is highly addictive. And
Yeah.
it's a really tough thing to give up because, well, first of all, it's legal and it's cheap. And because natural sugars cause a lot of the same biochemical processes, and, some carbohydrates are necessary for life, right? So a super low carbohydrate diet can cause all kinds of detrimental changes to your immune system and your thyroid function and your sex hormones. So you need some. So it's not like smoking where you go cold turkey, right? Or it's not like drug addiction where you go to a program, because you can't go cold turkey with food, right? And that's one of the biggest challenges with food addiction, is that you don't have that strategy to get over the addiction. And so for somebody who's really addicted to it, I can educate them, but beyond that, the decision has to come from them, and they have to be at a place where they're ready to commit. And I know it's frustrating. I know it's frustrating when we have family members who we see what they're going through, and we know that if they just, gave up gluten and ate more vegetables, they'd feel better, and they're resistant, and you can't do anything except for be there when they're ready and be the support for them when they are ready to make that change. And that's how I approach like everything that I do. So it's just, all I can do is educate and be a resource and be a support for people when they're ready to make that change. But I can't force anybody into eating a different way.
Right.
Sadly. Yeah. It'd be a lot easier if I could, right?
It would. If
Yeah.
we could push a few buttons and make them eat properly,
Right.
that would be wonderful.
Yes.
Going back to something we looked at, right in the beginning, you were talking about sort of starting a paleo way of life, or way of eating, by going as clean as you can, cleaning up your act, and then starting to experiment.
Yeah.
Can you provide a few steps that people might want to go through in order to do that with the maximum ease, but also the maximum effect?
There's two different ways to get to that clean part, right? Like, so the idea is to get to a really clean diet and stick to it for at least a few weeks, right? And I think there's different ways to get to that really clean diet. And I think that what works for different people is different. So what worked for me was rip off the Band-Aid, right? Just, figure out what I'm going to do, take a few days to prepare so I've got the right foods in my house, and then just do it. And And I think that works for a lot of people. So a lot of people do really, really well with that. I'm just going to muscle through this transition and then I'm going to be on the other side. But that doesn't work for everybody. So for other people, it stimulates that rebelliousness. It stimulates that, where are the rules that I can bend and still be technically paleo, right? And it sort of stimulates that kind of, for a lot of people, it sets them up to fail, right? They just can't maintain that kind of dramatic transition. And so for those people, I suggest a step-by-step. And I think the first thing is to give up gluten, and then work on, when you're taking out gluten-containing foods, not just buying gluten-free bread and gluten-free muffins, but finding a paleo food to take its place. So when you're giving up your cereal for breakfast, instead of buying rice checks, try getting used to having eggs instead, right? Or try getting used to just heating up some leftovers from last night, right? There's lots of different things for breakfast that are not eggs that you can eat. The only, nobody said breakfast has to be these foods. So what is common with all those foods is that they're easy, because we don't typically want to cook for an hour when we first wake up in the morning, weirdly. So I say, So give up gluten first, and try to replace it with fruits and vegetables and meats and eggs, and then work on the rest of the grains. So once you've given up the gluten-containing grains, then most people won't have very much else left in their diet. Maybe some rice or some corn, right? So get rid of those things, and then work on legumes. And I think soy and peanuts are like the two big targets, right? So getting rid of soy and then getting rid of peanuts. And those can be, I think, easier switches. So people a lot of the foods that are traditional foods made with kidney beans or black beans, a lot of those can be done with vegetables in their place. Or a lot of those foods just don't make your weekly rotation anymore, right? So you just don't make burritos anymore, because it's really hard to make paleo burritos. It takes a lot more effort to get that kind of flavor. It's not impossible, but maybe it's not something you want to do every week anymore. And so getting rid of those legumes, but really focusing on soy and peanut butter, just because of how much more inflammatory those are than other legumes. And each of these steps, right, you do however long it takes you for it to feel manageable and feel like you're ready for the next step. So for some people, they might go through the steps every couple of days. And for other people, it might take a month, right? It might take a month before they're sort of used to gluten-free, before they're ready to get rid of other grains. And I think changing the fats that we're cooking with is something that you do quite early on. So you can be giving up gluten and also getting rid of the canola oil and starting to work with coconut oil and butter and lard and tallow and these amazing flavorful fats that we've been told for the last 30 years are bad for us. As soon as you go back to it, food tastes so much better, right?
It does.
It's kind of an easy transition for people as soon as they figure out where to buy those ingredients. So you kind of work on fats like all the time that you're working on these other eliminations. And the whole time you're also working on more vegetables on your plate, higher quality meat and seafood, depending on what budget permits and what's accessible to you. And you start working on your plate looking like some quality protein, some meat or some seafood, and a few different kinds of vegetables. So you're kind of working on what you do eat at the same time as you're working on what you don't. And you take the elimination step by step. And so then once you get to grain-free and then you get to legume-free, the next one is dairy-free. And then I sort of leave, if there's any processed manufactured foods or refined sugars left at the end, right, then you get rid of those. And typically they kind of fall to the wayside as you're giving up everything else, right? So once you go gluten-free, a lot of the products that have those refined oils, refined sugars, food chemicals, those are suddenly gone because you're giving up a lot of processed foods as soon as you do that step. And so I sort of suggest, following the steps. And some people will find, right, somebody who says, well, I kind of always thought I was dairy intolerant because it doesn't make me feel that great. They might want to start with dairy instead of with gluten because it's going to be an easier transition for them. And that's fine. People can make this their own. And I think the important thing is for people to understand is if you're coming at this from a place of chronic health conditions, some people feel better with every step that they make, and some people don't. Some people don't feel better until they've made all the steps. So if you're going to take 6 months to do this transition, you need to have a way of maintaining that dedication to getting through the transition, even if you're not feeling better with every step. And so having some way of sort of keeping your eyes on the prize. And some people will do one step, although they'll go dairy-free and gluten-free, right? That's a really common first step. And then they'll jump in the rest of the way. Like once you've kind of gotten rid of gluten, that's the hard one to get used to. And then you might as well go, whole hog at that point. Yeah. And I think it's really important for people to respect themselves and know it's going to work for them and tackle this major life change in whatever way is going to be sustainable. Because the idea isn't that you go on a diet for 3 months and you go off of it. The idea is you're going to do this for the rest of your life. And so if you set yourself up to make it so hard that you're not going to be able to do it, that completely defeats the purpose, right? You're making it so it's not sustainable. So it's, some people will do these sort of paleo challenges, right? And they'll do a month of Whole30, and then they'll go right back to how they were eating. They'll feel terrible for a few days, and they'll kind of get used to feeling terrible. And then 2 months later, they will gain back all the weight, and they'll be like, I got to do another Whole30, and they'll do another Whole30, and they do like 3-4 health challenges a year. And when people find themselves in that cycle, those are the people who shouldn't be doing this transition all at once.
No.
Those are the people who should be taking it piece by piece. And then the other thing that I always tell people, no matter how you're transitioning to it, one of the best things that we can do to mitigate the cravings, to help our metabolisms adjust really quickly, because a big part of this, right, is reducing carbohydrate intake. Even if you're still staying sort of high carbohydrate within the paleo spectrum, it's still typically lower carbohydrate than where you started. So there's a metabolism shift to a metabolism that's more flexible, but that needs to happen. And there's a whole pile of symptoms that can go along with that. And then there's a hormonal shift that needs to happen. And then there's a digestive system shift that needs to happen. And all of those changes that are leading to better health, but be kind of awful to live through, all of those changes are sped up with more sleep. So I always say, really make sure while you're going through this transition that you're going to bed at a good time. You're getting 8 or 9 solid hours of sleep every night, because that's going to reduce the cravings. It's going to help fix the dopamine receptors in your brain and help fix that food addiction issue. It's going to help your hormones adjust faster. It's going to help your immune system adjust faster. It's going to help your adrenal glands and your thyroid. It's going to help your digestive system heal. And so all of the things that make dramatically changing how we eat hard, all of those things are made better if you're getting adequate sleep. So that's like the other, right? It's not all diet, it's also lifestyle.
A company in Dallas came up with a bacon flavored soap. Should we switch to that?
Bacon flavored soap?
How would you know it's bacon flavored unless you eat soap?
Well, you have to eat a piece of
like bacon when you're done?
Yes, I guess. I guess it was a big joke in Texas for a while because everybody was commenting. Apparently, either way, or they came up with the bacon flavor and they flavored the soap with it. So, should paleo people start using that soap?
It would be a great way to self-identify, wouldn't it? You must be paleo. I can tell by how you smell.
Yeah.
I all kidding aside, I do think that part of the lifestyle aspect of paleo is returning to more natural beauty care products, more natural moisturizers, more natural cleaners, supporting the human microbiome, so getting exposed to probiotics and supporting skin barrier with really nourishing fats as moisturizers. I don't think we need to go quite to the extreme of everybody smelling like bacon.
Well, that's good news.
But I do think that's part of this lifestyle.
You could use like me. You could use bacon drippings as a lipstick.
Well, I mean, a lot of people do use, right? Like, it's a natural fat. Lard is a great fat. The bacon drippings has a little bit of extra, salt and sugar in it, but smoke, yeah, good stuff. But I think that bacon fat is a great healthy fat, and I think we get very used to using the unflavored versions, right? You'll see moisturizers made with tallow or with lard or with coconut oil, olive oil, right? All of these sort of natural fats, and so there's if you like smelling like bacon, sure. But yeah, I think that I think that's a little bit extreme.
I call it paleo kissing.
I don't want to go there. Super job.
Back to you, Mark.
Okay. Well, I'm conscious of the time, so I think we should sort of start a little wrap up. You've given us a huge amount of expert information, and I do like the nerdy take, actually, that being an engineer, the scientific input does appeal to me, but people are going to want a lot more information from you. Where's the best place for them to get hold of you?
Definitely the best place is my blog, thepaleomom.com, and from there there's links to everywhere I am on social media, my podcast, my books, my consulting company, my free forum. Like, everything is easily found from thepaleomom.com. That's sort of like me central. Yeah.
Paleo Mom Central. Love it.
Cool.
Okay.
Well, Sarah, thank you very much for being on the Low Carb Paleo show. And as we say in Texas, à votre santé, y'all.
Thank you very much. It was really fun.
Yeah, it's been super having you. Thanks a lot, Sarah.
Thank you. All right.
Thank
Have
you.
a good day.